Whether you're a parent navigating myofunctional disorders or simply curious about optimizing your family's overall health, the Myohacker Podcast is your guide. Hi, I'm Karindy Ong, a speech-language pathologist, myofunctional therapist, and a mom on a mission to bring holistic health to you and your family. Together, we'll explore whole-body connections and integrative solutions. Please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review to help other families discover this important information. Visit myohackerslp.com for free resources and guides. Quick disclaimer. The content shared in this podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests do not necessarily reflect those of the podcast or its affiliates. This podcast does not provide medical, legal, or professional advice. Always consult a professional regarding your circumstances. By listening, you agree that the host and podcast are not responsible for any actions you may take based on the information provided. Now, let's dive into today's episode. With me today, I have Kim Wilson. She and I were we've already been having such a great conversation. That's why I was like, we need to start recording because I want all of you to be able to hear what we are talking about. This topic is so important. So in general, we're going to be talking about nature-based occupational therapy and how it is meeting such an incredible need for our children. I would argue for adults as well. But then we're really going to talk about this war on boys and what is going on as far as just in an educational space, where we are at with getting movement and learning in for our young boys. So first, though, before we talk into that really meaty topic that everyone stay tuned for that, let's talk about what is an occupational therapist. And then, so tell us what that is. And then tell us how you're doing occupational therapy, like in the woods, outside.
Yeah. Okay. So occupational therapy, occupation is defined as any activity that is meaningful to you in your day-to-day life. So it does not just mean what you do for work. We have in our society commonly misinterpreted what the actual meaning of occupation is, but I do wholeheartedly agree that we did ourselves a huge disservice by calling ourselves occupational therapists because a lot of people don't know what we do. So I will forever till the grave define what we do in hopes that people actually eventually know what we do. So it's anything that's meaningful to you in your daily routine. So that's a very large spectrum, by the way, but OTs basically adapt, equip, modify, support people to engage in those occupation. So it can be anything from feeding yourself, dressing yourself, driving to work. Participation in work is an occupation that OTs work on in order to help people successfully participate. For the child, it is their primary occupation is play. That's what kids do. But it also is much broader. So it's successful participation with their peers, right? Social engagement with their peers, which often includes play, right? And then, but it is also even more broader than that of, participation in the family unit, right? A lot of times I have SOS people coming to me of like, our family is in a state of fight or flight constantly because of whatever we're dealing with our child, right? And so it's them being able to just participate in the family unit, right? And so it's a broad definition, but basically that's what OTs do. And how I do that outdoors is really no different, I believe, than doing it in a clinic setting. Like I have the goals of the child, I have the goals of the parent, and it may be social emotional regulation in order to be able to participate with peers, right? Or it may be a fine motor goal of like they're in school, their fine motor skills are really struggling. They're not able to keep up academically.
Can you tell us what fine motor skills are?
Yes. Thank you for stopping me. So fine motor skills are any skills that you do with the small muscles of the hand. So we have gross motor skills and we have fine motor skills. Gross motor skills are big movements. You're jumping, you're skipping, you're running. Those are kind of gross motor movements. And then fine motor skills are anything we do with the fine muscles of the hand, the intrinsic muscles of the hand. So it can be, buttoning your shirt. It can be feeding yourself. It can be handwriting in school, right? So those are fine motor skills. And so, again, I address all of these goals just outdoors in nature. And so that might seem bizarre to people, but I just I view nature as my clinic space. And then I'm utilizing the environment of nature and the activities in nature in order to address those occupational goals. So as OTs, you'll hear us say that we use occupation as both a means and an end. Okay, so what that means is I always use the example of shoe tying. Okay, so say the child wants to be able to tie their shoes. That is an occupation. Say they go to school and in circle time, all the kids take off their shoes for circle time. And then they have to put them back on, and they are feeling like everybody in their class is able to tie their shoes. And that's an important goal for them, right? That's an important occupation. And so the child might have the goal of tying their shoes independently, right? And there's a lot of things that go into tying your shoes, whether it might seem like a very simple activity, but there's a lots of visual motor skills, lots of fine motor skills, lots of actually executive function of being able to plan, lots of coordination of being able to tie your shoes. And so those are what we call like the skills of being able to tie your shoes, right? And so sometimes you would work on the skill of tying shoes in order to address all those visual motor, fine motor, executive functioning. So that's when you use occupation as a means and an end. We're using shoe tying to improve function and visual motor skills, fine motor skills, executive function. And then that's the means, but it's also the end. As we use that occupation, the end result is actually being able to tie our shoes, right? And so you'll hear that. And OTs do that. I would say where I differ a little bit, maybe in my nature-based setting, is I am using the occupation of play in nature in order to address an abundance of skills or occupations. Does that make sense? Because the longer I do this work, the more I realize playful engagement in order to accomplish goals is actually the most effective with children, right? And quite honestly, sometimes using the actual occupation that is challenging for the child turns out to backfire because it's super frustrating and they're mad. They get frustrated that they can't tie their shoes, and they still can't tie their shoes when they go to circle time. And so then you get avoidance behavior. This happens all the time with toileting with kids. You get avoidance behavior because something's really hard. They can't sense it. They can't manage their clothing. So they just avoid it. And so the longer I do this work, the more I'm realizing that playful engagement is actually the ticket to participation and occupation amongst all occupation with children. And so I use a lot of play-based interventions in nature in order to address the visual motor skills, the fine motor skills, the executive functioning that are included into shoe tying. Let's just take that as an example. That will then easily translate to that occupation because we now have increased our visual motor skills, we now have increased our fine motor skills, and we now have increased our executive function. And so we have these skills to be able to translate it to a variety of occupations. Does that make sense? And then when I see that those skills are improving, I might introduce that occupation at the appropriate time when I know it will be the just right challenge for that child and we won't get those avoidance behaviors. I'll say, I think based on what I'm seeing in these play-based activities that like if we do shoe tying now, they're probably going to be able to do it. And then there's going to be this, I did it. Like I'm now motivated to be able to do this occupation, right? It sounds a little bit silly when I use the example of shoe tying, but I feel like it's a concrete example of kind of what I'm doing. So,
well, I think of, just looking at that task specifically, if you go into a clinic working with an OT, you might have a little shoe, that has the laces in it. And it's like, and doing that, and maybe they're going across a worksheet. So that's what it would look like in a clinic setting, something like that. I'm not an OT, but
it's true.
I've seen it done.
It's true.
What would be the difference taking it outside? What are some tasks you would do
100%.
to target that?
And I'm a little bit biased because I obviously chose to shift outside, but I feel like the outdoor environment, the activities are just way more motivating for the child. Like I have 6 kids of my own. So like my child, maybe not your child, but for the majority of children, I've been doing this a while now. They would much rather whittle a stick than do this like shoelace thing on a board or do this worksheet. Do you know what I mean? And so,
okay, wait, you just said whittle a stick. This makes me so happy. Can you tell us how you work this in? And it already tells me like you must have some amazing families that choose to work with you because you're incorporating some risky play.
Yes. And I
Because
do.
whittling it's no joke. That's
Yes.
sharp.
And I do have a risky play waiver that I make parents sign because I have to be very intentional about this is an alternative treatment approach. And so for the most part, I would say if a family is stumbling upon I try to make it super clear on my website and even super clear on my social media accounts of like what this is all about. So family. And so even prior to doing my discovery call, I tell families like, you need to go to my website, you need to go to my social media. So you're like in the know about like what this looks like because it needs to be a good fit. It's not a good fit for everyone. I would argue that in most cases, if you can get behind the philosophy, it is a good fit. But not all families can get behind the philosophy. Some families hate the outdoors. Let's just be honest, right?
Yes.
And so, I do need to make sure that that's going to be a good fit. And then I am very clear that in my risky play waiver that obviously, ultimately, at the end of the day, your child's safety is of utmost importance. I'm not doing anything that would intentionally put your child in danger. However, like we are going to be doing activities that there could be the potential that they get hurt. We're going to climb trees and they might fall. We're going to whittle a stick and they might get cut. Like, knock on wood, I've never had any significant injuries in my almost 4 years of doing my private practice. But I was taking kids outside well before that. And I also am very clear with my families that of the benefits of risky play. And I provide upfront, even prior to our first treatment session, I give them the literature that supports like what does risky play do for your child's development in order to prove myself of like, this is why I'm doing it. Like, and if you and then I also have a very candid conversation with them of like, assess yourself. Like, is this something that you struggle with? And if so, you need to communicate that to me, because if you're in session and you're getting all dysregulated because your child is, 7 feet up on a tree, like this is a conversation we need to have and we need to work through this, and we need to eliminate kind of the helicopter parenting philosophy. And so I have very candid conversations with, but also I am not doing anything like without wisdom, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not handing a child a knife and a stick that doesn't have the skill sets to be able to do that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I, our first sessions, I'm spotting kids super closely because I don't know them. Like, they could be, their situational awareness could be terrible. Their body awareness could be terrible. And like, they very well could fly off the tree, and I am super close. I am that helicopter therapist those first couple sessions in order to identify where's their skills, where are they at, and how much room can I give them. And so whittling a stick, there's actually grading of the activity well before you're giving a kid a knife, right? We use sticks, and we use, like the plastic tops of a fountain drink as like, like when you get a candle and it has the little plastic thing so the wax doesn't drip on you. So we use the plastic
so clever.
on the stick. So their hand is covered by the plastic fountain drink top. And then the stick is through the top. So they have a little barrier. And then you, like a softer type of stick, you use a vegetable peeler. Of like, you're just doing vegetable peeling because that's a safer way. So you're doing the motor learning of that, and you might build on those skills. Then you might transition to the kid is just holding the stick and I'm doing the knife, right? And we're getting used to that. And then we build those skills, right? So it's not like first session I'm handing the kid a knife and a stick and saying, whittle this, right? It's with wisdom and with a skilled set of eyes. I've been doing this a long time, and I'm fully aware our profession literally is all about activity analysis and being able to analyze the activity and know what skills are required for that activity. And if the child doesn't have it, I'm not going to have them do that right away. I'm going to grade the activity appropriately to make it a just right challenge. So,
but I think it's so important that we talk about, risky play and really how we do need that. And here's the thing, at some point, we will be participating in risky activities, whether that is crossing the street Or, and I want someone to know, okay, well, maybe you're 16 years old, but you need to know not to look at your phone while you cross the street because you might get hit by a car or things like this. Like, there are skills that to get around in life, you need to be able to navigate and judge, okay, how risky is this? What do I need to do to prepare to mitigate some of that risk?
Yeah.
Like, these are tasks we start learning in bite-sized pieces, because if it's like, okay, is it safe to cross the street or not? That's too big of a jump to start if you've never warmed up.
Correct. And I think that this is a crisis in our society. I was trying to choose my word carefully, if you could tell.
No, I think it is a crisis.
Yeah, it's a crisis, epidemic, whatever you want to say, of like these kids who we've just created too safe of environments for our kids. And again, you don't have to just take my word for it. It's the body of research is developing about what risky play actually does for our kids at a young age. Like it promotes self-efficacy. It promotes them knowing and learning their own boundaries and their own capabilities without somebody telling them you're capable or you're not capable, you can't do that. They actually learn like what they can and can't do, and then they will independently make the decisions of what's safe to participate in. I'm saying in general, in general child development. There obviously is, some challenges and diagnoses and things like that make it more challenging for children. But I'm saying in general for child development. And so it boosts their self-confidence because they learn to do things that they didn't know that they could do, right?
Yeah.
And so I joke that we lived in the Netherlands for 3 years, and the Dutch.
I was born in the Netherlands, so I love it. And
like, why were you there? Are you
just my dad's? I mean, it was his job. I lived in Bangladesh as well. Like, I moved around different places, and there are definitely different schools of thought on how to raise children around this world.
We need to do an entire other podcast on culture and culture and play. I feel like it comes down to, because the Dutch have this like nailed. I'm like, I showed up in the Netherlands, and obviously from my OT lens, I'm sitting there thinking like, wow, this park is like a lawsuit waiting to happen in the United States, but it like made me giddy because I'm like, yes, this is awesome. Like, we're talking like bridges over water in parks, and like kids are easily navigating them, right? They're not falling in. And so they have this nailed down of like just this embracing of risky play. And
well, they also ride bikes everywhere. So the adults themselves are having to navigate life with balance and coordination at a level that we actually don't have to.
I had my mama bike when I was there. I have this picture of myself where I had a kid on the front of my bike, a kid on the back of my bike, and then I had a kid slung to me on the front, and I was like riding to get my eggs. And like, that's the culture. Like and so anyways, that I digress. We could talk about that for forever, but culturally speaking, the United States definitely has some work to do as far as embracing risky play. I do see some positive signs as far as like, I always say if someone could just pay me to like travel the world and document, the different playgrounds and parks of the United States, that would be like my dream job, because I love just seeing the creativity and having the lens of like what it's doing for a child's development. And I am seeing like a little bit of shifting, and like some of the things that are the new parks that are coming to be of more open-ended play, more, natural structures where it allows the children to, what I say is the play structure doesn't dictate how the child plays with it, but the child dictates how you play with it. I love play structures like that. And so I am seeing more of those pop up, which is exciting to me because I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Like, this is so good for our kids. So
here's the thing, what can happen. I know I won't get into the specifics, but I know of a school that incorporates more of this model of risky play.
Yes.
And they recently, a little girl, she fell off of something, broke her arm. And even though the parents initially were on board with, yes, we want our child to have risky play, we want all of this, suddenly as a parent, when your child gets hurt, there can be this like, actually, that's not what we want. We want to take that out. We want to shift this. And so it can become more of a litigious situation
Yeah.
when here's the thing, even though that is painful, like there is learning in that. And I'm not saying we want our kids to be getting hurt, like
Yeah.
really severely hurt. That's not what we want, but we do want to be building up those skills so they aren't getting, once they get on monkey bars or things like that, that
Yeah.
we're building up the skill set so they can land on their feet, so they
Yes.
can shift and jump
Yeah.
and
One of my
earliest
posts was on monkey bars and how controversial they are. Monkey bars and trampolines are so controversial, and I am pro monkey bars. I'm pro trampoline, just for the record.
Yeah.
But you and I got onto a discussion about like haters and trollers and stuff about like social media. And anyway, I mean, we could go on and on about that as well, of like, there is this whole camp too that talks about like risky play privilege of, and it could be a whole other podcast, but talking about if you're okay for your child to participate in risky play, there's a privilege that comes with that, of like having healthcare to be able to address the broken arm, having not dealing with anxiety. Like if you're a mom who has anxiety and your child, okay, I recognize that, but at the same time, again, in general, like those aren't the normal scenarios. Do you know what I mean? Like, and especially with anxiety, like the risky play, I do think it does a lot for our parents and our parenting too. Like it stretches us. I'm not saying it shouldn't elicit any sort of feeling in you when you see your child navigating this thing that's really high up and there's the potential for them to get hurt. Obviously, I don't want my children to get hurt either. But like just thinking broader of like also what that's doing for our kids and stuff. So
okay, I just have to share, it's so funny. We were at swim practice last week, or maybe, I don't know, recently, and my boys, they were out there and they're hitting together rocks and they were like, you can smell it, we're about to start a fire, because it was making sort of a sulfur burning smell. And this one mom, she was like, what on earth, what are they saying? And I was like, well, first, with what they've got, they're not going to start a fire. If they do, I'm going to buy them an award of some sort, because that's amazing. And she was like, what? You would encourage your children to start a fire with sticks or with rocks? And I was like, yes,
that would be awesome. That would be awesome.
It was so funny. She was cracking up. She was like, you mother very differently. And I was like, yeah, I think I do.
Yes. And also, I can't count the number of times with my own children that you have to understand that your perspective of somebody else's child is not the educated version of like the mother knows the child best. I can't count the number of times that people at parks have said something to me of being nervous and posed their nervousness on what I was allowing my child to do. And the reality is that even within my 6 children, I have children of varying capabilities. And so my boys, I have 4 girls and 2 boys, and this could also lead into our next conversation, but like I'm very well aware that boys and girls are wired differently, and both of my boys are very, very capable gross motor wise, and so they do things that make, especially at parks, that make other parents nervous. And so I can't count the number of times that another mom had said something to me, and so in general, I think it's a good rule of thumb that unless the parent is completely absent and not supervising, in general, that mother knows their child best and their capabilities and skill level. And it's an uneducated guess on your part of like what that child's capabilities are. And therefore it shouldn't impose any level of nervousness, or unless of course their parent is completely absent and not supervising at all. But yeah.
So let's talk about that. How girls are perceived, how boys are perceived, as far as what is play that is healthy for them, and what the expectations are for their movement. Like these are things that are starting to really impose, I would just say we're seeing a change in society and what is expected of children.
Yes.
And ultimately, this is going to change us as adults. It already is, but we haven't yet seen this full wave
Yes.
of what is happening from a neurodevelopmental standpoint when we're not moving our bodies. So can you
Yes.
talk to us about the movement needs of boys?
Yes. So I uh, I am frequently like termed, I'm one of the like most movement based OTs that people I've worked with. I've had many families say that to me, and I think that's from my neuro background. I
Yep.
started my career in adult neuro, brain injury and spinal cord, and neuro is just like a deep passion of mine. And so neurodevelopment has always been a passion of mine. And I truly believe with all my heart that movement is the catalyst for all development. And I don't think I have to argue that on any level. If you just look at general child development, right? Like movement is the catalyst for everything, right? Even just in that, 0 to 1, all the developmental milestones, the catalyst for everything is movement, right? Like eye movement, tracking a toy, that leads to reaching, right? And then that reaching is the integration of the ATNR reflex. Like movement is the catalyst for all development. And so I'm constantly telling all OTs, like it's within your scope of practice. Like a lot of OTs will maybe feel if they're working on gross motor skills, they're encroaching on physical therapy or whatever it is. And I just think it is an injustice to our kids when we're in OT, when we're working on a variety of skills. Like I said, executive function, fine motor, like attention, like social emotional regulation, like to be ignoring the movement piece of those skills, I think is a huge injustice to kids. And so movement in general, I utilize movement as one of my primary treatment tools for participation in a variety of occupations. And so that's just where I land on the whole topic, specifically with boys. And, I did go on kind of like a righteous anger rant on social media about
let's talk about that. I want to read from this because I loved it. It resonated with so many of us. And it's a very, very powerful post. Jenny Urich, I think she's the one that brought it to light because she's amazing.
Yes.
And more people need to read it. So I'm just going to read a part of it. So you said, stop demanding developmentally inappropriate expectations, and I guarantee you will see their brilliance shine. Boys process more blood flow through the cerebellum than girls. This can make boys more likely to associate learning with movement. The cerebellum is the part of the brain that controls balance, posture, and gross motor movements. It develops rapidly in both boys and girls during early life, but it continues to develop for longer in boys. This leads to boys having a greater interest to pair learning with movement. Stop demanding that they sit still and then call them dysfunctional when they can't.
Yeah, I get emotional about it. Like I get emotional when I either reread that I wrote that but it's something that it just really penetrates my heart, because having done this for 18 years now, you can attest to this. You just start to see trends in, and this is a trend that is heartbreaking for our boys because it's how they're wired, it's how they're designed, right? And like our society constantly and continually, for what we've talked about, like it's not just a recent phenomenon. I feel like it's been stirring for a while, and yet we continue to not change our view, to not change our lens, to not change our environment, to not change the way in which we teach our boys. And it produces a righteous anger in me, and obviously a lot of emotion, because what I like to say is I am on the receiving end of it, of parents, the phone call from parents of just crying because the school suggested medicating their child for attentional challenges, or the parent who's crying because their boy they continue to get the phone call that their boy's in the principal's office again because he refused to sit still, And so I'm on the receiving end of a lot of this emotion from families. And then these boys show up and they all, I don't want to say every child is fearfully and wonderfully made and they are unique in their own right. But as a clinician, you do your assessment and you see profiles, like these profiles of these kids that are so identical, it's a little scary. Where you're like, this is the profile of the kid. These boys are insanely smart, like so smart, so creative, think outside the box. They have a tendency to do actually really well with adults because they can hold like really great conversations that are well above grade level. They have this intuitiveness about them of like, well, Miss Kim, do you enjoy what you do for work? Like just isn't a normal conversation from a first grader or kindergarten. They have this keen ability to connect with adults, and they have this key, and I think that truly comes from their inquisitive nature. Like they know that adults have a lot of answers, and they know that adults can provide a lot of wisdom, and so they connect with adults. They often have troubles with their peers because they're so bright and they think differently that in those young ages, K through 3, they feel like their peers don't get them, or they just don't get their peers because their peers can't think outside the box like them, right? And so they all, anyways, I could go on about the similarities of these boys, but and they all, in one way or another, have some sort of challenge in school, like sitting, attending, and so they might struggle academically with whatever academic content is. And then you get them and you realize how insanely bright they are, and you let them move, and you start to test things that, they might be failing their reading in school, but you let them move or jump on and you all of a sudden are seeing them read, right? Or excel in those academic skills that they're maybe struggling with in school. And this is like a very general profile of the patterns that I'm seeing. And it does. It makes me angry because these kids are being labeled, these boys specifically are being labeled dysfunctional at such a young age, when and quite honestly, I'm like, we need these boys. Like these are the boys that are going to be world changers, right? Like they think outside the box. They don't go with the flow. They don't stand in line. They don't, do you know what I mean? And I want to say, I do preface this with parents of, there's a difference between like just outward disrespect, right? I am not championing a boy who just like won't stand in line because I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to be disrespectful. Do you know what I mean? But what I'm saying is that like, we need more of these kids that challenge the status quo of like, why do I need to do that? That are the questioners. Oh, that's another thing that the profile of these boys of like, they're questioners of like, even when I'm doing my assessment, so why do I need to do this? Like, that's I love that. When I hear the boys say the why, I'm like, I love it. Like, I don't take that as disrespectful. I don't take that as challenging my authority, right? I take it as like, no, you're a questioner. You want answers. You're inquisitive. You're creative, and you want the why. And like, we want these boys in our society, right? We don't just want to pound it out of them. Right. And so, anyways, I see these trends.
It makes me think of, and this is a good discussion to transition into, is how do we, so I love that you're homeschooling your 6 children. I was homeschooled as a kiddo.
Really?
And I love it. I will just say, in my family right now, it does need to be a partnership of, wherever you're at, that everyone agrees
100%.
that homeschooling or whatever that method of education is for everyone.
100%,
and so this is an ongoing discussion, but not, right now we are in the public, my boys are in the public school system. And we had a discussion with the teacher. She was like, so I think your youngest, his creativity is getting in the way of learning. And I was like, can you give me an example? And she was like, well, he took some scissors and he was sharpening a pencil with them, he had, because he does know how to whittle.
And whittling a stick. Yeah.
Right. And so, and she stopped him and she said, this is dangerous. This is risky play. She literally used that because they talk about not doing risky play in the classroom. Right. There are ways that sometimes I'm like, I'm training my boys to make it difficult at school. But, and so he was doing this and she said, this is dangerous. And he said, no, it's not. I'm a wild man in the wilderness. And I was like, I love that. That was her example of him basically going against the grain and not participating in learning. And I was like, actually, he's my hero. I love that. But because then she gave that example and I talked about how I encourage these things at home. And I get it. She has a room full of little boys that all want to be moving and making shivs and whatever it is. So I'm like, okay, let's talk about when we can do these behaviors, when we cannot, but asking her, how can he incorporate movement or stimulation for himself while he's doing this pen and paper task, this tabletop task? What are the conversations that you encourage families to have with the teachers, with the educators, so that we don't lose these boys? And I mean, he could have gone forward with the stamp of like, I don't approve, he's too creative. And instead we were able to collaborate and it's like, oh, he's wonderfully creative.
Yes.
I'm encouraging this. I want you to as well. What do you tell parents to do in these cases?
Yeah. And obviously, like, the first thing is advocating, right? Like you said. But also, I tell families all the time that the environment that you put your child in I say K through 3, but I would even argue maybe K through 5, is one of the most important decisions that you will make as a parent. And I am a believer in that, given, and I say it directly like that, the environment that you choose to put your child in. And I do want to be sensitive because I understand that there are a variety of situations where you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
You do not have a choice. As far as the environment that they're put in. However, like, you always have a choice of advocating. Okay. Yeah. And so now there are some environments that are more receptive, some educational systems that are, I've talked to some families, I've been in schools that are wonderful and they receive the tools and the strategies and they want to do better. And I've been in some educational settings where it's like, this is the way we do it. This is the expectation. Done, end, dot. And I have a very candid conversation with the family of like, is this the environment? Like, there is no room for the environment changing. So we can talk about researching different school options, a better environment. And so I am just such a believer in this because that K through 3 is so pivotal, especially for our boys, in developing confidence, developing their identity of who they are, developing their love of learning. And sometimes I've had families say, well, we don't want to communicate to our child that, like, when things are hard, we just, jump ship and we accommodate for them. And I've had to really talk through with some families of like, if you know anything about me, like, just go to my Instagram or social media pages for like 1 second. You will know I value so much developing grit in kids, like developing. I'm not saying we accommodate and adapt at all costs, but I am a believer that in K through 3, that environment, you want to, to the best of your ability, get your child into an environment where they feel loved, they feel supported, they feel encouraged, that they are seen for who they are as an individual and how they're wired, and they are not just bombarded by, this is your weakness, this is your weakness, this is your weakness, you can't do this, you can't do that. It is a very delicate balance of recognizing their strengths and their weaknesses, gently bringing to light what those weaknesses are and having a very realistic view of how we're going to work on those, but 100% having a strength-based approach with these kids of like, you're creative, you think outside the box, like, and calling those strengths out, because there is nothing more damaging and nothing that can impact your child's trajectory of learning than the environment that you choose to put them in. And then we build those skills of operating in all environments. Because I've had parents say to me, well, their boss won't always let them get up and move. And I'm like,
Right.
yes, I get that. But we're dealing with a first grader, right? We're dealing with a first grader. And we have to remember that we're building skills in our kids, right? We cannot expect our kids to have all the skills that they need as an adult, right? And the reality is as an adult, we have a lot more choices about like our boss, our work environment, the environments that we're operating in. I don't think we give enough time and attention to the fact that like our kids have nearly zero control over the environment that they operate in. And yet we expect them to function at optimal capacity in every environment that we put them in without building skills. I have a kiddo of one of my children in that like K through first, second, really struggled with attentional priority. Like we're talking, I would be doing a homeschool lesson with her and it was like, what are we having for lunch? Like just her attentional priority was all over the place. And I easily recognized it. And I recognized in those years, she really benefited from a lower STEM environment, things that weren't capturing her attention if we were going to be working on academic goals. And then most recently, I know she has to build that skill, right? And we've built some really good skills. And so I started, and I also recognize that as in a homeschool environment, it is more often than not a very low STEM environment, and that's not going to be the environment that she operates in all the time. And so we started going periodically to just the Starbucks at the most busiest time with all of her schoolwork to challenge that, build that skill of like, I recognize this is something that she has challenges with. And now we're going to bump it up and we're going to really challenge and develop that grit of like, there's this person passing by ordering this latte and she's having to really filter that attentional priority on her schoolwork, right? And so I think we always have to remember that like our kids aren't built or born with all the skills they need to function as an adult. And we need to have grace and patience and come alongside them and really have a strength-based approach while also simultaneously working on those weaknesses or challenges while solidifying their identity of who they are and how amazing they are, all their amazing strengths that they have.
I am like you. These kiddos are the ones I just love. For one thing, I was that active tomboy that was out and about, and I'm so grateful I was homeschooled because I was able to run around and play and climb trees and do all the things.
Yes.
And so it has been a challenge for me and an identity hit in that I'm like, I want my kids to have all of that, but at least for this season, they don't have that same thing I did. So I've built in, like in the mornings, we do have a trampoline. Yes, judge, whatever. But we do. They are out in the trampoline. I try to make sure they're getting their feet wet. Dew on the grass is on their feet and all the, and they don't always love it. And they're jumping around on rocks and looking for things. And it's annoying sometimes to have to wake up, earlier to get them running, moving, because I want that they're discharging some of that energy, getting that regulation, that proprioception, just all of that in. It also means making sure they're getting sufficient sleep so they're not having to stim during the day, which again, all of these things are hard, guys. I'm just here to say it's hard, but there are things we can do to support these boys who need that movement. And then letting them play outside. Letting them actually play outside. And this is so hard with neighborhood kids that they are given screens. And I get it because then it's for the parents low risk. There are lots of reasons. And I see everyone's in a different place of what they need to do. But this is where I'm like, okay, we're going to be out here. I'm playing with you guys. We're going to set up Foursquare. We're going to do all of this just to get all of these boys outside. And playing.
Yes. And I love that you said that because there are so many, even if your child is in the school system, like there's so many opportunities throughout the day of you to give their central nervous system that input that actually will be calming and regulating for them to operate in that highly, highly structured environment. And I do want to say something in regards to what you said as yourself of being you're a girl who, because I did get, when I made those posts to my stories, and then Jenny shared it, there was some people who commented about like, where the girl moms at, like this, you're talking about boys, but that's my girl, right? And so I do want to speak to that of like, I see it. I was speaking more from a clinician of like, this is the pattern I'm seeing with the referrals that I'm getting. But I in no way, I am fully aware that like, I believe wholeheartedly that both girls and boys, we are operating in a movement deprived society, and that impacts both boys and girls. Hear me say that very clearly. I know I just spoke specifically of boys, but that was from a lens of the referrals I'm getting over and over and over again. And it is supported that like in general, boys' movement needs are much higher. Ask any boy mom, ask anybody who has worked with boys, like they know and will support it with their expertise that boys' movement needs are higher. That is not to say that
I had it pulled up. I don't have it right here, but talking about the research of girls versus boys and ADHD diagnosis and, inattentive versus hyperactive. Yes, girls tend to fall more in that profile of inattentive, and then boys tend to be more of hyperactive. And so, and all of this is changing, as the research is changing, even just and coming up to speed with, yes, there are girls that have this. I was one of those. It wasn't until I was in grad school that I was diagnosed with it. And I was so glad it was my my motor, motor speech, professor. And she was like, you need to go get tested. And I was like, is this easy for everybody? Once I realized like what it was like to not be fighting all of that attention just all the time. But I do think in general, our boys are needing this movement. They are needing it. They just need it. So what are two or three things that, let's say this is a mom right now who she's probably like outside, or she's got a kid flailing or running around, and she's trying to listen to this podcast and gain some insights on how does she help, these little ones turn into strong young men of character that aren't going to prison. I think that's everyone's like worry. How do you do that?
Well, first, I think, the spectrum of like a dysfunction versus function, like I think it's important to recognize. I was speaking, I said something very, I think, black and white of like, stop labeling these boys like it's not a dysfunction of your boy, it's a dysfunction of the environment. And while I think that is true for a lot of boys, I want to also speak to the fact that like, that's not to say that there's not areas that need to be worked on, or there doesn't need to be skilled intervention. Does that make sense? Like, I want to make sure that I say that of like, there could very well be, if you're at a point where you're looking at your boy and you're like, holy cow, like, I don't even know what to do with this child. It might not be helpful for you just to chalk it up to like, well, this is just how they are. Like, even though it is wreaking havoc on every area of function of their life. Does that make sense? And so there are tools and strategies to be able to, number one, provide your child's central nervous system with appropriate input. And I have found it helpful. We as a society, our view of appropriate or adequate movement needs is so skewed because of how sedentary our lifestyle is, that I think it's helpful. And I would say this to all the listeners, if you're listening, of like, what do I do? We have to reframe and unlearn what is actually an appropriate level of movement throughout the day. Because
tell us, I don't know.
And I don't even like to put hours or minutes.
Please do. Can you give just a general frame? Well, I tell people, we used to chew 4 hours a day. Now we're chewing maybe 4 minutes. It helps.
So true. So they say like, the average child only is outside 4 minutes a day for unstructured outdoor play. And we really need to be outside 4 to 6 hours a day. And I say that and people are like, there's no way. There's no way we can. I get that seems like a very not attainable goal, right? And so, but what I will say is often, I am often working with families of like, they'll say to me like, well, I did this and I did that, and we went outside here and we went outside there. And often I'm having to say, we've got to up the ante. Like, it's not enough. It's not enough. So I really do hesitate with giving hours because I feel like I am a big believer in building atomic habits of like, you have to start somewhere. Like if I tell a mom to get outside 4 hours of unstructured play a day, they're going to be like, heck no, that's not attainable. If I tell a mom, I always start with where they're at. Like if they're only doing 4 minutes, we're doing 15 minutes that week, right?
There we go.
If they're only doing 30 minutes, we're doing maybe 45 minutes or an hour, right? There's always, I'm a believer, like when we know better, we do better. And there's always room for doing a little bit better. And so like I said, I always hesitate with giving. I always start with where the family's at and we bump it up and we keep bumping it up until we start to see the impact of it on that child's nervous system, because we're all different and we all have different movement needs, right? And we have some with very high thresholds, some with very low thresholds, and you will see a difference. Like when you start to reach that threshold for your child, you will start to see functional differences within them that point to, oh, I hit it. Like I'm getting there. We're getting there. And so that's kind of how I like to answer that question.
I love it. Well, and I'll just say one more point before we start closing up is that the unstructured play sometimes is too big a leap. So start with structured play.
Yeah.
It just, it's like Foursquare, that's relatively structured when I get it started for the boys.
Yes.
Then they start doing all, once I'm kind of out of it, it doesn't necessarily look like the Foursquare we know. Like it becomes something wild and crazy, but you give them a starting point, then it can become unstructured. And I think more and more with our kids who don't have this sort of muscle, developed of unstructured play, it's okay. Get out there structured and then let it go loose. And then you'll see the benefits of the unstructured play.
Yes. And I think to add to that, in our society, our concept of how much time it takes for skill development is also drastically skewed, or how much time it takes in order for something to develop is also, because we kind of live in this like hustle and bustle society of like immediate gratification, immediate results. And number one, I always say parenting your kids or child rearing is you're in it for the long game. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? And you have to start somewhere. I always say, like people ask, like, we ski and we hike, and everybody's wanting tips of like, how do you do that with your kids? And I'm like very candid of like, I'm not starting with 3-mile hikes. Like we're starting on maybe a 0.25 nature walk, right? Because the goal is developing the love of, and there's no quicker way to develop a hate for the outdoors than a parent or a mom who's dragging their kid on 5 or 7-mile hikes when they don't have the endurance or the skills to do so, right? Or even with skiing, I say that all the time when my kids were itty bitty. It's like we would maybe do 1 or 2 runs and then we're having hot chocolate in the lodge, right? Like you have to have appropriate expectations and develop mentally appropriate goals and skills for your children. But to lead with the whole thing of like Foursquare or whatever, it can take kids like 30 to 45 minutes of boredom outside to come up with something. And we often are the culprits who mess that up because we don't like just sitting there and them saying a million times, I'm bored, mom, what can I do? I'm bored, mom, what can I do? And it's our discomfort with that boredom that interferes with them getting there. And so if you can get yourself in a headspace as a parent of not giving the solution, not giving the idea, although I am a big proponent too of playful engagement. Like your kids have to see you enjoying play and the outdoors in order to also, like, it's contagious. And so I am a believer. Our family loves outdoor games too. We love, crossnet and cornhole and all the things, and playful engagement can be a really great way to like get your child into it, but then also be okay with mom's taking a break in the lawn chair and we're going to sit here and I'm literally keeping my mouth shut. I'm not saying a word. You guys are going to come up with something creative, and give them enough time and they certainly will.
And there's so much of that if we can just be outside, even doing, I'll bring my laptop outside, and in Texas, it starts getting really, really hot. So this is like a sacrifice of love that I am out there when it's 100 and whatever, and it's humid, but I'm like, I'm going to be out here and until the computer starts to overheat, because it just, they're like, and they will say they're bored. And I'm like, this is a brain growing moment. Yay. Which they think is obnoxious. And that's good.
It's great.
But then just being there, it's like, then they go off and they're doing things in the yard or outside, whatever it is. Yeah. If you're just modeling, I'm outside too.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. It's
okay.
Great.
How do people find you? What are the best ways for people to connect with you on the internet?
Okay, so you can go to my website and all of my contact information is on there, and that's www.naturespathot.com. And then I am on social media, so I'm on Facebook at Nature's Path Occupational Therapy, and then I'm also on Instagram at natures.path.ot, and you can connect with me there as well, and so that's how you find me.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Kim, for today. It has been my pleasure and encouragement. I hope everyone that's listening is feeling that encouragement today too, and feeling like going out and taking a walk outside, because we all need it.
Thank you so much for having me on. This is so fun to chat with you and talk about all the things. I feel like we have to have some follow-up.
I think we do. I think we do.
Yeah.
So thank you again so much. And everyone, please share, and listen to these episodes. Okay, the Myohacker Podcast is here to help equip families with how we can help our kids develop in the healthiest, most robust, and hopefully fun way. So I thank you that you guys are here. Share, subscribe. We have more amazing episodes coming soon. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Myohacker Podcast. Remember, small changes can make big impacts on our overall health and well-being. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. This way, more families will learn about this important information and we can make a bigger impact. Head on over to myohackerslp.com for in-depth resources and guides. You can also join me on Instagram at myohackerslp for bonus content and demos. And if you have questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, send me a message. I would love to hear from you. Until next time, let's biohack myofunctional health as myohackers who change the world through intentional action and connection and breathing. Quick disclaimer reminder, the content shared in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only.